The champagne bubbles tickled my nose as I watched my son Gerald accept his Rising Star Award at the Metropolitan Business Excellence Gala, his tailored navy suit gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. Pride should have swelled in my chest as he stepped up to the mahogany podium, but instead, a familiar ache settled in my stomach as I sat alone at table 47, tucked away in the shadows near the kitchen doors where the +1s and family guests were seated. What Gerald didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the company celebrating him tonight, Meridian Holdings, had been quietly owned by me for the past 8 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I am Clarisse Thornton, and at 64 years old, I've learned that the most powerful position in any room is often the most invisible one. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sipped my untouched salmon and listened to my son's acceptance speech. This award belongs not just to me, but to everyone at Pinnacle Marketing who believed in innovation over tradition, Gerald announced, his voice carrying that familiar tone of condescension I'd grown to recognize over the years. Sometimes you have to leave the old ways behind to embrace the future. Old ways. That phrase had become his favorite dismissal whenever we talked about business, about life, about anything, really. If Gerald only knew that those old ways had built the very foundation his precious career stood on. 23 years ago, when Gerald was just starting college, my late husband Richard and I had scraped together every penny we had to start Thornton Consulting Services. We worked out of our garage, handling bookkeeping for small businesses in our neighborhood. Richard handled the client relationships while I managed the numbers, a skill I'd honed through decades of stretching family budgets and managing household finances that Gerald had always dismissed as just mom stuff. After Richard passed, away 12 years ago, I could have sold the business and retired comfortably. Instead, I doubled down. I saw opportunities in the digital transformation that was sweeping through business services. While other companies were slow to adapt, I invested every profit back into technology, hired young programmers, and acquired struggling firms at bargain prices. By 2019, Thornton Consulting Services had evolved into a holding company controlling dozens of smaller firms across the marketing, technology, and business services sectors. I'd learned to navigate corporate structures, tax advantages, and acquisition strategies that would make Harvard MBA graduates jealous. But I did it all quietly, methodically, without fanfare or recognition. Most importantly, I did it using a network of shell companies and legal structures that kept my name buried deep in corporate filings. To the outside world, these companies appeared to be owned by various investment groups and management firms. In reality, they all traced back to one person, the woman Gerald had long ago dismissed as just a housewife who never understood the real world. Meridian Holdings, the parent company of Pinnacle Marketing where Gerald worked, had been my most strategic acquisition. 3 years ago, when the company was hemorrhaging money due to poor management and outdated systems, I purchased it through one of my acquisition vehicles for a fraction of its potential value. I brought in new leadership, Bernard Kramer, a sharp CEO I'd worked with on previous turnarounds. Together, we modernized their operations, streamlined their processes, and positioned them perfectly for the digital marketing boom. Within 18 months, Meridian Holdings had tripled its revenue and become one of the most respected firms in the industry. Gerald had joined Pinnacle Marketing 2 years ago, drawn by their reputation and competitive salaries. He had no idea that every paycheck he received, every promotion he earned, every opportunity that came his way was ultimately funded by the woman he regularly dismissed as out of touch with modern business. The beautiful irony was that Gerald actually was talented. His marketing strategies were innovative, his client relationships were strong, and his results spoke for themselves. Tonight's award was genuinely deserved, based on his individual contributions. But the platform that allowed him to showcase those talents, the company culture that nurtured his growth, the financial stability that let him take creative risks, all of that existed because of decisions I'd made in boardrooms he didn't even know I had access to. As I watched Gerald charm the audience with his acceptance speech, I couldn't help but remember the last time we'd had dinner together, 6 months ago. I'd mentioned casually that I was considering some new investments, maybe expanding beyond consulting services. "Mom, with all due respect," he'd said, not bothering to look up from his phone, "you don't understand how business works today. Everything's digital now. It's about disruption and innovation. Your generation just doesn't get it. Maybe focus on your garden or something more. Age appropriate. Age appropriate." The sting of those words had stayed with me for weeks. What Gerald didn't understand was that while he was networking at trendy co-working spaces and posting motivational quotes, on LinkedIn I was quietly revolutionizing entire industries. While he talked about disruption, I was actually implementing it. While he dismissed my generation as out of touch, I was leveraging decades of business experience with cutting-edge technology to build something far more substantial than he could imagine. The hardest part wasn't the secrecy itself. It was watching my son struggle with imposter syndrome and self-doubt that could be easily resolved if he just knew the truth. Gerald worked twice as hard as he needed to because he felt he had to prove himself in a family of non-business people. He carried stress about job security that was completely unnecessary. He made career decisions based on a scarcity mindset. That didn't reflect his actual situation. But I'd learned from watching other wealthy families that sudden revelations of family money often destroyed more relationships than they helped. Gerald needed to find his own way, build his own confidence, earn his own respect. My role was to ensure he had the opportunity to do so, even if he never knew I was creating those opportunities. Tonight, as I watched him bask in well-deserved recognition, I felt a complex mixture of pride and melancholy. Pride in his accomplishments, which were genuinely his own. Melancholy at the distance between us, a gap that seemed to widen with each of his professional successes. Gerald concluded his speech with a promise to continue pushing boundaries and refusing to be held back by outdated thinking. The audience applauded enthusiastically. I clapped politely from my corner table, wondering if he would ever realize that the biggest boundary he needed to push was his own assumptions about the people who loved him most. What I didn't know, as I gathered my purse and prepared to leave the gala early, was that within 48 hours, Gerald would say something so cruel and dismissive that it would force me to make a choice I'd been avoiding for years. The choice between protecting his feelings and protecting my own dignity. And when that moment came, Gerald would learn that underestimating your mother can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports from my various holdings. Gerald's name appeared on my phone screen, which surprised me. He rarely called during business hours unless he needed something. "Mom, I need you to watch Emma this weekend," he said without preamble, referring to my 8-year-old granddaughter. "Grace and I are going to that corporate retreat in the Hamptons. It's important for my career." Grace was Gerald's wife, a lovely woman who worked as a pediatric nurse and somehow managed to maintain her warmth despite Gerald's increasingly cold pragmatism. Emma was the light of my life, the one family relationship that remained uncomplicated and pure. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, already mentally rearranging my weekend schedule. "I'd love to spend time with Emma. Will you be staying at the Meridian corporate house?" "How do you even know about that?" Gerald's voice carried that familiar note of exasperation. "Mom, you really need to stop pretending you understand my work. It's embarrassing when you try to sound knowledgeable about business." I bit my tongue. Of course I knew about the Meridian corporate house in the Hamptons. I'd personally approved the purchase 2 years ago as part of the company's employee retention strategy. The $3 million beachfront property was designed to host executive retreats and reward top performers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Gerald's invitation was actually my idea, implemented through Bernard during our monthly strategy meetings. I just heard you mention it before, I lied smoothly. Have a wonderful time. Friday evening, Gerald dropped Emma off at my house with her weekend bag. My granddaughter ran straight into my arms, chattering excitedly about a school project on family history. Gerald barely made it past the foyer, checking his phone constantly and tapping his foot impatiently. Emma, why don't you go put your bag in the guest room? I suggested. I need to talk to Daddy for a minute. Once Emma was out of earshot, I turned to Gerald with what I hoped was a casual expression. How are things going at work? You seemed stressed during your speech the other night. Gerald's face immediately hardened. Everything's fine, Mom. More than fine, actually. I'm being considered for senior vice president. They're talking about fast-tracking me to the executive team. My heart swelled with pride, even as I maintained my neutral expression. The SVP promotion was indeed in the works. Bernard and I had discussed it just last week. Gerald's performance metrics were outstanding, and his client portfolio had grown by 30% in the past year. The promotion was well-deserved, though Gerald didn't know I'd specifically asked Bernard to ensure the advancement opportunities were merit-based, not influenced by my ownership. That's wonderful, Gerald. You've worked so hard. Yeah, well, some of us have to work for what we get, he said, an edge creeping into his voice. We don't all have the luxury of sitting around all day, living off insurance money. The comment stung. Richard's life insurance policy had indeed provided financial security after his death, but Gerald had no idea how I'd multiplied that money into a business empire. To him, I was simply a widow living comfortably off his father's legacy. I keep myself busy, I said mildly. Busy with what? Your book club? Volunteering at the library? Gerald shook his head dismissively. Mom, you're 64 years old. When are you going to accept that your productive years are behind you? You should be focusing on being a grandmother, not trying to, reinvent yourself or whatever this is. What do you mean by this? All these questions about business, pretending to understand corporate strategy, acting like you have insights about my career. It's embarrassing, honestly. Grace's mother knows her place. She bakes cookies and tells stories about the old days. She doesn't try to give career advice or pretend she understands modern business. The comparison to Grace's mother, a lovely woman who had indeed chosen a more traditional grandmotherly role, felt like a physical blow. There was nothing wrong with baking cookies and telling stories, but the implication that this was all I was capable of, all I should aspire to, revealed how little Gerald truly knew about me. I'm just trying to understand your world, I said quietly. My world? Gerald laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mom, you've never had a real job. You've never had to compete, never had to prove yourself in a professional environment. Dad handled all the business stuff when he was alive, and now you just exist. Comfortably, but you exist. The words hung in the air between us like poison. Never had a real job, just exist. Each phrase was carefully chosen to diminish, to reduce my life to something small and meaningless. Gerald, I think you're being unfair. Unfair? His voice rose slightly, then he glanced toward the stairs and lowered it again. Mom, I'm trying to protect you from embarrassing yourself. When you ask questions about business strategy or try to give me career advice, people notice. My colleagues, Grace's friends, they see this old woman trying to insert herself into conversations she doesn't belong in. Old woman. The phrase hit harder than the rest. I see, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel, Gerald continued, his tone softening slightly as if he'd just delivered necessary medicine. "I'm trying to help you understand reality. You're not young anymore. You're not in the business world. You're my mother, Emma's grandmother, and that should be enough. Stop trying to be something you're not." The front door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me standing in my foyer, processing what had just happened. My son, the boy I'd raised, the man whose career I'd secretly nurtured, had just told me to accept my insignificance. What Gerald didn't know was that while he was delivering his lecture on knowing my place, I was mentally calculating exactly how much his place in the business world was worth. And for the first time in 8 years, I began to wonder if it was time for him to learn the truth. Sunday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually lifted my spirits. Emma and I had spent a wonderful weekend together, baking her favorite chocolate chip cookies, working on her family history project, and watching old movies. She'd interviewed me about my childhood, asking innocent questions about what life was like in the olden days, with the genuine curiosity that only children possess. "Grandma, were you ever a boss of people?" Emma had asked while we worked on her project. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because you talk about business stuff like Daddy does, but you're nicer about it. And you always know the right answers to everything." Out of the mouths of babes. If only her father could see me through her eyes. Gerald and Grace were scheduled to return by 3 o'clock. I had Emma's bag packed and was helping her finish a drawing of our family tree when I heard Gerald's car in the driveway. Through the window, I could see him on his phone, gesturing animatedly as he talked to someone. "Daddy's home!" Emma squealed, running to the door. Gerald entered, still talking on his phone, barely acknowledging Emma's enthusiastic hug. No, that's not what Kramer said at all," he was saying to whoever was on the other end. "The Meridian board wants innovative thinking, not safe plays. We need to position ourselves as the next generation of leadership." I felt a familiar pang. Gerald was discussing strategy for a board I indirectly controlled, making assumptions about what Kramer wanted based on Bernard's careful management of information I provided. It was like watching someone solve a puzzle while I held all the missing pieces. Grace entered a few minutes later, looking tired but happy. "Clarisse, thank you so much for watching Emma. Did you two have fun?" "We had a wonderful time," I replied, hugging my daughter-in-law warmly. Grace had always treated me with genuine respect and affection. "How was the retreat?" "Oh, it was lovely. The house was incredible, right on the beach." Gerald networked constantly, of course, but I got to relax and read. Grace glanced at her husband, who was still pacing with his phone. "Gerald, honey, you've been on that call for 20 minutes. Emma missed you." Gerald held up a finger, signaling for quiet, then continued his conversation. "Listen, I need to call you back. I'm at my mother's house and—" He paused, glancing at me with obvious irritation. "And I can't really talk freely here." He ended the call and immediately turned to Emma. "Go get your stuff, princess. Daddy needs to get home and prepare for some important meetings tomorrow." "But I wanted to show you the family tree Grandma and I made," Emma protested. "Later, sweetheart. Daddy's very busy right now." As Emma reluctantly went to collect her things, Gerald turned to me with barely concealed impatience. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Of course. Did you say anything to anyone about my job? About Meridian Holdings? Or Pinnacle Marketing?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said. Have you been talking to people about my work? Because someone at the retreat mentioned that they'd heard my mother was very interested in my career and asked a lot of questions about the company." My mind raced. I'd been extremely careful to keep my various identities separate, but perhaps someone had noticed my questions or made connections I hadn't anticipated. "I might have mentioned that I'm proud of your success when talking to friends," I said carefully. "Is that a problem?" Gerald's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Mom, this is exactly what I was talking about on Friday. You can't go around pretending to understand my professional world. It's embarrassing. Gerald, Grace interjected softly. I think you're overreacting. No, Grace, I'm not. Gerald's voice was rising now, and I could see Emma hovering uncertainly in the doorway with her bag. This is about boundaries. This is about knowing your place in the family dynamic. The phrase, knowing your place, again. It was becoming his favorite weapon. What exactly did someone say? I asked, genuinely curious about what had triggered this reaction. Ken Morrison from the Hartford office said his wife mentioned meeting Gerald's mother, who seems to know quite a bit about business strategy. Then Arnie Walsh asked if you had some kind of consulting background because apparently you'd made some comment about market positioning that impressed someone at some social function. I remembered now. 3 weeks ago, at Grace's book club meeting, I'd been introduced to several women whose husbands worked in various business sectors. The conversation had naturally turned to their spouse's work, and I'd made a few casual observations about digital marketing trends. Nothing specific, nothing that would reveal my true knowledge, but apparently enough to make an impression. I was just making conversation, I said. Making conversation? Gerald's voice dripped with disdain. Mom, you don't make conversation about business strategy. You don't have the knowledge or experience to contribute meaningfully to those discussions. When you try, it reflects poorly on our entire family. Gerald, that's enough, Grace said firmly, but he ignored her. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to build my reputation? How many years I've spent proving myself? Gerald stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper so Emma couldn't hear. And now I have colleagues asking about my mother, who apparently thinks she's some kind of business expert. It's humiliating. I never claimed to be an expert, I said quietly. Good, because you're not. You're a 64-year-old woman who's never accomplished anything professionally in her entire life. You're living off Dad's insurance money, and your biggest achievement is raising kids and keeping house. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but stop pretending to be something you're not. The words hit like physical blows. Never accomplished anything. Living off insurance money. Biggest achievement is keeping house. Gerald! Grace's voice was sharp with shock, but Gerald wasn't finished. I'm trying to be kind here, Mom, but you're forcing me to be blunt. You're a worthless old hag who doesn't understand the modern world. Stop embarrassing yourself and stop embarrassing me. Know your place. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide with confusion and hurt. Grace stared at her husband in horror. And I stood there, feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Worthless old hag. The phrase echoed in my mind as Gerald ushered his family toward the door, muttering apologies to Grace about having to be harsh sometimes, and promising Emma they'd look at her project later. As their car pulled away, I remained standing in my living room, processing what had just happened. My son, the boy I'd loved unconditionally, the man whose success I'd quietly orchestrated, had called me a worthless old hag. What Gerald didn't know was that this worthless old hag was about to make some very expensive decisions about his future. That night, I sat in my home office staring at the framed photograph on my desk, Gerald's college graduation day, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride and hope for his future. The young man in that picture had thanked me in his valedictorian speech for showing me that wisdom comes from experience and strength comes from perseverance. When had that gratitude curdled into contempt? When had my love and support become embarrassing to him? I opened my laptop and began reviewing the corporate structure I'd built over the past decade. Thornton Holdings, the parent company, owned 67% of Meridian Holdings through a maze of subsidiaries and investment vehicles. Meridian, in turn, owned Pinnacle Marketing, along with 14 other companies across various sectors. The annual revenue of my holdings exceeded $400 million. Gerald's salary at Pinnacle Marketing was $180,000 annually, plus bonuses that averaged another $60,000. His pending promotion to senior vice president would raise his base salary to $250,000. In the context of my overall business empire, Gerald's compensation represented less than 0.1% of annual revenue. He was, quite literally, a rounding error in my financial world. Yet this worthless old hag had spent years ensuring his success. I pulled up Bernard's latest report on Pinnacle Marketing's performance. Gerald's division had indeed exceeded targets, but what the report didn't show was how I'd structured those targets. Through Bernard, I'd ensured that Gerald's team received the most promising client prospects, the best support staff, and priority access to new technology platforms. His success wasn't artificial, his skills were genuine, but the playing field had been carefully tilted in his favor. The irony was staggering. Gerald thought he was succeeding despite coming from a family of non-business people. In reality, he was succeeding because he came from a family where business acumen ran deeper than he could imagine. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Grace's number. My daughter-in-law had looked genuinely horrified by Gerald's behavior. She deserved to know that someone in the family appreciated her husband's cruelty. "Clarisse?" Grace's voice was soft, almost whispered. "I'm so sorry about today." Gerald was completely out of line. "Thank you, sweetheart. How is Emma?" Confused. "She keeps asking why Daddy was mean to Grandma. I told her that sometimes adults say things they don't mean when they're stressed, but—" Grace paused. "Between us, I don't think Gerald was stressed. I think he meant every word." The honesty in her voice was both painful and validating. "Grace, can I ask you something? Has Gerald always talked about me this way when I'm not around?" A long silence. Then, "Not always. But lately, yes. He seems to resent any mention of family, especially when it comes to his work. He acts like acknowledging you somehow diminishes his achievements." "And what do you think?" "I think he's forgotten who he used to be," Grace said sadly. "The Gerald I married was proud of his family, grateful for the sacrifices you and Richard made. This version of him, I don't recognize this version." After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my office, processing Grace's words. Gerald hadn't just insulted me today, he'd revealed who he'd become. The ambitious, grateful young man had been replaced by someone who saw family connections as weaknesses, elder wisdom as embarrassment, and my love as something to be hidden. I opened my computer again and began typing an email to Bernard. "Bernard, I need to schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning. We need to discuss some strategic changes at Pinnacle Marketing. I'm considering a restructuring that might affect the executive team." I hesitated before hitting send. Once I started down this path, there would be no going back. Gerald would learn the truth about who really controlled his professional destiny, but that knowledge would come at a cost. The fairy tale he'd constructed about his self-made success would crumble. His relationship with me would never be the same. But then I remembered his words. "You're a worthless old hag who doesn't understand the modern world." I sent the email. Within minutes, Bernard replied, "Of course, Clarisse. Is everything all right? This is unlike your usual hands-off approach." I typed back, "Everything is fine. It's time for some family business to become actual business." The next morning, I dressed carefully in my best navy suit, the same one I'd worn to close the Meridian acquisition 3 years ago. My silver hair was styled professionally, my makeup subtle but authoritative. If Gerald thought I looked like a worthless old hag, he was about to discover how expensive his misconception would be. Bernard's office occupied the top floor of the Meridian Holdings building downtown. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor gave me time to review my strategy. I wasn't planning to destroy Gerald's career. That would hurt Grace and Emma, who were innocent in all this. But I was planning to teach him a lesson about assumptions, respect, and the true source of his opportunities. "Clarisse, Bernard stood as I entered his corner office, with its panoramic view of the city. You look like you're ready for battle. Not battle, I replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. Education. I outlined my plan methodically. Gerald would learn the truth, but gradually and in a way that would maximize the lesson while minimizing collateral damage to the family business. Are you sure about this? Bernard asked when I finished. Once Gerald knows you own the company, everything changes. You can't go back to being the uninformed mother he can dismiss. Bernard, yesterday my son called me a worthless old hag because I dared to show interest in his career. He told me to know my place in front of my granddaughter. He's embarrassed by my very existence. I leaned forward slightly. I think it's time he learned exactly what my place really is. Bernard nodded slowly. What's the first step? I smiled, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. First, we're going to make some organizational changes at Pinnacle. Marketing. Nothing dramatic, just enough to get Gerald's attention. Then we're going to let him draw his own conclusions about why his career suddenly became interesting. And if he figures out the connection, then my worthless old hag brain will have to figure out how to run a $400 million business empire, I said with grim satisfaction. I think I can manage. 3 weeks into my education campaign, I was having morning coffee when my phone rang. Grace's name appeared on the screen, and her voice carried an unusual tension. Clarisse, have you talked to Gerald lately? He's been strange. Strange how? Paranoid, I guess. He keeps getting mysterious phone calls that he won't discuss. Yesterday, he came home convinced that someone at work is sabotaging his projects. He's been staying late every night, double-checking everything. I suppressed a smile. Bernard and I had been implementing subtle changes at Pinnacle Marketing. Nothing dramatic, just enough inconsistencies to make Gerald question what he thought he knew about his workplace. Maybe he's just stressed about the promotion, I suggested, innocently. That's what I thought. But then Deborah called me. My attention sharpened. Deborah Richardson was Grace's sister, who worked in human resources at a competing firm. She was also, unbeknownst to Grace, someone I'd been quietly gathering information from through my network of business contacts. What did Deborah say? She said some headhunter contacted her asking about Gerald's background. Very detailed questions about his family, his education, even questions about you specifically. They wanted to know about your professional background, what kind of business experience you had. This was unexpected. I'd been careful to keep my investigation one-directional. That is odd, I said. Did she say which company? Some firm called Blackstone Executive Search. Gerald doesn't know about the call. Deborah called me directly because she thought it was weird they were asking so many personal questions. After Grace hung up, I immediately called Bernard. Have you heard of Blackstone Executive Search? I asked without preamble. Never heard of them. Why? I explained Grace's call. Bernard was quiet for a long moment. Clarisse, I think someone else is investigating Gerald, and by extension, possibly investigating you. What do you mean? Think about it. Gerald's been making waves at industry events, asking questions about Meridian's ownership structure, trying to figure out who really makes decisions. Maybe someone noticed his curiosity and decided to do some digging of their own. The implication hit me immediately. In my effort to teach Gerald a lesson, I might have attracted unwanted attention to my carefully constructed business empire. Bernard, I need you to hire a private investigator, quietly. I want to know who Blackstone Executive Search really is, who they're working for, and what they've discovered. Already on it, Bernard replied. But Clarisse, there's something else. Ken Morrison from our Hartford office called me yesterday. Remember, he's the one whose wife mentioned meeting you at that book club? What about him? He said Gerald approached him directly, asking about Meridian's ownership. Specifically, he wanted to know if there were any silent partners or family investors involved in the company. Ken said Gerald seemed convinced that someone with inside knowledge was influencing his career path. My heart began to race. Gerald was getting closer to the truth than I'd anticipated. What did Ken tell him? Nothing specific. But he did mention that Meridian was part of a larger investment group. Gerald pressed for details, but Ken said he didn't have access to that level of information. So Gerald knows there's more to the story. It gets worse, Clarisse. Yesterday, Gerald submitted a formal request to HR asking for clarification on Meridian's corporate structure. He wants to know who he's really working for. I felt the carefully constructed walls of my secret beginning to crumble. The plan had been to educate Gerald gradually, on my terms, in a controlled environment. Instead, he was conducting his own investigation, and apparently, so was someone else. There's one more thing, Bernard continued. Our IT department flagged some unusual activity on Gerald's company login. He's been accessing files and systems well outside his normal scope of work. Financial reports, ownership documents, board meeting minutes, anything he can get his hands on. Can you restrict his access? I could, but that would definitely raise red flags. Right now, he's not doing anything technically wrong, just thorough. I walked to my home office window, looking out at the garden Richard and I had planted together 15 years ago. The autumn roses were still blooming, defiant against the approaching winter. Like me, they were tougher than they appeared. Bernard, I think it's time to accelerate our timeline. What do you mean? I mean, Gerald is going to discover the truth whether I want him to or not. The question is whether he learns it from me or from some investigation that might expose more than just my ownership of Meridian. And this Blackstone executive search? Could be corporate espionage, could be a competitor trying to understand our structure, could be someone with a grudge against Gerald or the company. But whatever it is, I don't like the idea of unknown parties digging into my family's business. So what's the plan? I turned away from the window, my reflection ghost-like in the glass. We're going to give Gerald exactly what he's looking for, but we're going to do it in a way that ensures he understands the full scope of his misconceptions. The full revelation? Not quite. But enough truth to stop his investigation and send a clear message about who he's been calling a worthless old hag. As I hung up the phone, I realized that what had started as a lesson in respect was becoming something much more complex. Gerald wasn't just going to learn about my business success, he was going to discover that his entire professional world had been shaped by forces he'd never imagined. The question was whether our relationship would survive the revelation. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Grace appeared at my door at 8 a.m., looking determined and slightly nervous. Clarisse, we need to talk. Gerald left for work early, and I think something serious is happening. I invited her in, noting the manila folder clutched in her hands. Last night, Gerald was on the phone until almost midnight, Grace began, settling into my kitchen chair. He kept pacing around the house, talking to someone about corporate structures and beneficial ownership. After he went to bed, I looked through his briefcase. She opened the folder, revealing photocopied documents, handwritten notes, and what appeared to be a crude organizational chart. Grace, you shouldn't have. No, Clarisse, you need to see this. She spread the papers across my kitchen table. Gerald has been investigating his own company. Look at this. The organizational chart showed Meridian Holdings at the top, with lines connecting to various subsidiaries, including Pinnacle Marketing. But what caught my attention were the question marks scattered throughout and the notes in Gerald's handwriting. Who is C. Thornton? And connection to mother? My blood ran cold. He was closer than I'd realized. There's more, Grace continued, pulling out a legal pad covered in Gerald's precise handwriting. He's been tracking what he calls anomalies in his career progression. Look at this list. I read Gerald's notes with growing alarm. Promotion timeline accelerated after mother mentioned business interest. Best clients assigned to my division. Coincidence? Office relocation to better floor. Requested by upper management. Mother asks suspiciously informed questions about work. Ken Morrison's wife says mother knows about business strategy. Grace, how long has he been working on this? Based on the dates, about 2 weeks. But Clarisse, there's something else. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Gerald thinks someone in the family has connections to his company. He doesn't suspect you specifically, but he's convinced there's some kind of influence. I studied my daughter-in-law's face. What do you think? Grace was quiet for a long moment, then met my eyes directly. I think Gerald has always underestimated the people who love him, and I think maybe there's more to this family than he realizes. Before I could respond, Grace reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. There's something else. Yesterday, a woman called me. She said she was from Blackstone Executive Search and wanted to verify some information about Gerald's family background. What did you tell her? Nothing. But Clarisse, she knew things. She knew about your volunteer work at the library. She knew Richard had owned a small business. She even knew about Emma's school. This wasn't just a routine background check. The pieces were falling into place in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. Someone was investigating my family with a level of detail that suggested either corporate espionage or something more personal. Grace, I need to ask you something, and I need you to trust me. Are you willing to help me protect this family? She nodded without hesitation. Of course. What do you need? I need you to call that woman back. Tell her you've reconsidered and you're willing to answer questions, but only in person. Set up a meeting. You want me to meet with her? We're going to meet with her. Together. I want to know who's really behind this investigation. Grace agreed, and while she made the call, I texted Bernard. Emergency meeting. Someone is investigating the family. Need full security review immediately. The meeting with the Blackstone investigator was scheduled for that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. Grace and I spent the morning coordinating our story and preparing for what might be a very revealing conversation. At noon, Bernard called with updates from his private investigator. Clarisse, Blackstone Executive Search is a shell company. It was incorporated 3 months ago, minimal staff, operates out of a virtual office. But here's the interesting part. The incorporation papers list the business address as the same building that houses Cora Financial Group. I've never heard of them. Neither had I, until an hour ago. Cora Financial is a mid-sized investment firm that's been trying to acquire companies in our sector. They've made unsuccessful bids on 3 of our competitors in the past year. The picture was becoming clearer. They're not investigating Gerald specifically. They're investigating Meridian's ownership structure. Exactly. Gerald's questions at industry events must have caught their attention. They probably think he has inside information about potential vulnerabilities or succession planning. So Gerald's investigation triggered their investigation. It looks that way. But Clarisse, there's more. Our IT security found evidence that someone has been trying to access our corporate databases remotely. The attempts have been sophisticated but unsuccessful so far. I felt a chill. What had started as a personal lesson for my son was becoming a corporate security issue. Bernard, I want you to call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Full disclosure of the security issues, and I want recommendations for protective measures. Are you planning to reveal your identity to the board? Not yet, but I want them to understand that Meridian is under investigation by parties unknown, and that we need to protect our corporate structure. As I hung up, Grace looked at me with growing understanding. Clarisse, there's something you're not telling me about all this, isn't there? I met her gaze steadily. Grace, there are things about this family that Gerald doesn't know. Things that might explain his career success and this investigation. Are you going to tell me? After we meet with this investigator, I think it might be time to tell both you and Gerald the truth. The woman waiting for us at Corner Cafe looked nothing like a corporate investigator. Cora Martinez appeared to be in her early 50s, well-dressed, but not expensively so, with the kind of warm smile that immediately put people at ease. She stood as Grace and I approached, extending her hand with practiced charm. "Mrs. Thornton, thank you for agreeing to meet. I'm Cora Martinez from Blackstone Executive Search." I noticed immediately that she'd used my married name, though Grace had only given her first name during their phone conversation. Someone had done their homework. "Please call me Clarisse," I said, settling into the booth across from her. "This is my daughter-in-law, Grace." "Of course, I understand you're both concerned about the nature of my inquiry regarding Gerald." Grace leaned forward slightly. "It just seemed unusual, the level of detail you were asking about. Most background checks don't require information about grandparents and family businesses." Cora's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "You're absolutely right to be cautious. Let me be more direct about why I'm here." She pulled out a leather portfolio and opened it to reveal several printed pages. "We represent a client who's considering Gerald for a very senior position. The role would involve significant responsibility and access to sensitive corporate information." She slid one of the pages across the table. It was a job description for Chief Strategy Officer at a company called Apex Holdings, with a salary range that made my eyes widen despite myself. "This position requires extensive vetting, including family background checks. We need to ensure there are no potential conflicts of interest or security concerns." "What kind of conflicts of interest?" I asked carefully. "Well, for instance, if family members had business interests that might compete with or influence decisions at Apex Holdings." Cora's eyes met mine directly. "Or if there were undisclosed family connections to companies in our sector." The conversation was becoming a chess match. Cora knew more than she was letting on, and I suspected she was testing how much we knew about Gerald's actual situation. "I'm not sure I understand," Grace said. "Gerald works in marketing. His family doesn't have business connections." "Actually," Cora said, pulling out another document, "our research suggests that might not be entirely accurate." She placed a printout in front of us. It was a corporate filing showing Thornton Holdings as a registered business entity. This company was incorporated by Richard Thornton in 1995. Richard was Gerald's father, correct? My heart began racing, but I kept my expression neutral. "My late husband had a small consulting business, yes, but that was dissolved years ago." "Was it?" Cora asked gently. "Because our records show Thornton Holdings underwent significant restructuring in 2016, not dissolution. The current corporate structure is quite complex." Grace looked confused, but I could see the understanding dawning in her eyes. She was beginning to piece together what Cora was really saying. "What exactly are you implying?" I asked. "I'm not implying anything, Mrs. Thornton. I'm stating that your family's business interests are far more extensive than Gerald apparently realizes, and our client is very interested in understanding why a potential senior executive doesn't seem to know about his own family's corporate holdings." The moment of truth had arrived sooner than I'd planned. "Who is your client?" I asked directly. Cora closed her portfolio. "I think you already know Mrs. Thornton. Or should I say, Ms. Thornton of Thornton Holdings, parent company of Meridian Holdings, parent company of Pinnacle Marketing." The silence stretched between us. Grace stared at me with shock and growing comprehension. "How long have you known?" I asked Cora. "About 3 weeks. Your son's questions at industry events caught our client's attention. They thought he might be positioning himself for a corporate takeover or acquisition. When we investigated, we discovered the truth was far more interesting." "And what truth is that?" "That Gerald Thornton has been working for his mother's company for 2 years without knowing it. That his career success, his promotion opportunities, his access to prime clients, all of it has been orchestrated by family connections he's completely unaware of." Grace found her voice. "Clarisse, is this true?" Before I could answer, Cora continued. The question our client has is whether Gerald is genuinely unaware of the family business, or whether this whole thing is an elaborate deception designed to hide the family's corporate strategy. Your client being Cora Financial Group, I said. For the first time, Cora looked genuinely surprised. You've done your homework too. I protect my investments, Ms. Martinez, and my family. I leaned forward. What does Cora Financial want? Initially, we wanted to understand Meridian's acquisition strategy. Your companies have been quietly buying up firms in our sector, and we wanted to know if you were planning a major consolidation that might affect our clients. And now? Now we're more interested in the family dynamic. Gerald is talented, ambitious, and completely unaware that he's been working in the family business. That kind of naivety could be very valuable to the right employer. I felt a surge of protective anger. You're trying to recruit my son by exploiting his ignorance about his own family. We're offering him an opportunity to succeed based on his own merits without family influence, Cora corrected. Isn't that what he wants? Grace had been silent throughout this exchange, but now she spoke up. You need to leave. Both of you need to figure out how to fix this family mess without involving corporate headhunters. Cora stood up, leaving her card on the table. Gerald is a talented executive and he deserves to know the truth about his career. We'll be in touch. As she walked away, Grace turned to me with a mixture of hurt and amazement. How long were you planning to keep this secret? Forever, if possible, I admitted. But Gerald forced my hand when he called me a worthless old hag. And now it seems like everyone wants to use our family dynamics for their own purposes. Grace shook her head slowly. Gerald is going to be devastated when he finds out. Maybe. Or maybe he'll finally understand that being part of this family isn't something to be ashamed of. Grace and I drove home in tense silence, both processing the implications of what we'd learned. As we pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed with a text from Bernard. Emergency. Gerald just submitted his resignation. He's demanding to meet with the board of directors immediately. My blood ran cold. Grace, we have a problem. I showed her the message. Her face paled as she read it. He knows, she whispered. Somehow, he figured it out. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Gerald's name appeared on the screen, and his voice was barely controlled fury when I answered. What the hell have you done to my life? Gerald, I think we need to sit down and… Sit down? You want to sit down? His voice was rising. I just spent the last 4 hours with a corporate lawyer, Mom. Do you know what I learned? Grace and I exchanged glances. This was spiraling out of control faster than I'd anticipated. Gerald, please come home so we can discuss this as a family. Family? Family? He laughed bitterly. You mean the family business I've been unknowingly working for? The family empire you've been hiding while letting me struggle with imposter syndrome and self-doubt? Where are you right now? I'm at the Meridian building in the lobby, waiting to meet with Bernard Kramer. You know, my boss's boss's boss, who apparently works for my mother. I closed my eyes. Gerald, don't do anything rash. Let me come down there. Oh, you're going to come down here? To your own building? To protect your investment? His voice was getting louder, and I could hear echoes suggesting he was in a public space. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To my career? To my reputation? Gerald, your career success is real. Your skills, your achievements. Are they? Are they real, Mom? Or have I been playing a rigged game this entire time? Have my colleagues been humoring the boss's son without knowing it? Have my promotions been merit-based or nepotism? The pain in his voice cut through my anger. He was genuinely devastated, questioning everything he'd worked for. How did you find out? I asked quietly. Cora Martinez called me an hour ago, told me everything. About Thornton Holdings, about Meridian, about you. She said she thought I deserved to know the truth about my own family. I felt a surge of rage. Cora had deliberately sabotaged our family dynamic for her own corporate purposes. Gerald, that woman is trying to manipulate you. She works for a company that wants to acquire our businesses. She's using our family situation to— Our businesses? Gerald's voice cracked. Our businesses? There is no our, Mom. There's your secret empire, and there's me, the fool who thought he was making it on his own. Grace took the phone from my hand. Gerald, it's me. You need to come home right now. Emma is asking for you. And this conversation needs to happen in private, not in a corporate lobby. Grace, did you know? Did you know that my mother owns my company? I found out today, the same time you did. Jesus Christ. I could hear Gerald's breathing, rapid and shallow. My whole career has been a lie. No, it hasn't, Grace said firmly. Your work is real. Your clients love you. Your colleagues respect you. That hasn't changed. Hasn't it? How can I ever trust my own judgment again? How can I believe any success is real when I don't know what's being manipulated behind the scenes? I took the phone back. Gerald, we need to talk face to face. Please don't do anything that you'll regret. Like what? Like quitting the job I didn't know was handed to me by my mother? Too late for that. You submitted your resignation? I submitted my resignation, demanded a meeting with the board to discuss corporate governance irregularities, and I'm considering consulting with an attorney about potential fraud or misrepresentation. My heart sank. Gerald wasn't just hurt. He was talking about legal action against the company. Against me. Gerald, you're making this into something it's not. I never interfered with your day-to-day work. I never influenced your performance. Reviews. Your success. Stop. Just stop. His voice was exhausted now. I can't listen to you right now. I can't even look at you right now. Gerald, I'm going to stay at Arnie's place tonight. Grace, please pack a bag for me. I need time to figure out what's real in my life and what's been orchestrated by my mother's guilty conscience. The line went dead. Grace and I sat in my car, staring at my silent phone. This is bad, Grace said finally. This is a disaster, I corrected. Cora Martinez deliberately destroyed our family to further her own agenda. And now Gerald is threatening legal action against the company. What are the implications of that? If Gerald pursues legal action, it could expose the entire corporate structure. Other companies might see vulnerability and try to acquire us. Employees might panic about job security. The board might demand my resignation. Grace looked at me with growing understanding. You could lose everything. I could lose everything, I confirmed. But what's worse is that I've already lost Gerald. And I might have lost Emma's respect, too, if she finds out her grandmother has been lying to the family for years. As we sat in the growing darkness, I realized that my attempt to teach Gerald a lesson about respect had backfired spectacularly. Instead of learning to value his mother, he now saw me as the architect of a deception that had undermined his entire sense of self-worth. The worthless old hag had indeed made some very expensive mistakes. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure how to fix any of it. The next morning brought a series of devastating phone calls. The first came from Bernard at 6 a.m., his voice tight with stress. Clarisse, we have a major problem. Gerald's resignation letter has been leaked to the press. Business Journal is running a story this morning about nepotism and corporate governance, failures at Meridian Holdings. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. How could it have been leaked? Who would have access? That's the issue. The leak came from someone inside the company, but we can't identify who. The article quotes Gerald directly, talking about systemic deception and family members secretly controlling his career without his knowledge. What else does it say? It raises questions about our corporate structure, our hiring practices, and whether other family members of executives might be hidden owners. 3 major clients have already called asking for clarification about our management structure. I felt the walls closing in. Bernard, schedule an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. We need damage control immediately. Clarisse, there's more. Gerald's attorney contacted us an hour ago. They're threatening a lawsuit alleging fraud, emotional distress, and breach of fiduciary duty. They claim Gerald was induced to work for the company under false pretenses. After hanging up, I called Grace, but her phone went straight to voicemail. My third call was to my lawyer, who delivered even worse news. Clarisse, if Gerald pursues this lawsuit, it could trigger a cascade of legal issues. Other employees might claim they were misled about the company's ownership structure. Clients might argue they were deceived about who they were really doing business with. And if the corporate veil is pierced, your personal assets could be at risk. By 10 a.m., I was dressed and driving to Gerald and Grace's house, hoping to salvage some communication with my family. The house was dark, Grace's car gone from the driveway. A neighbor mentioned seeing them leave early with suitcases. My phone rang again, this time an unknown number. Mrs. Thornton, this is Jennifer Walsh from Business Journal. I'm calling for comment on the story we published this morning about Meridian Holdings and the allegations made by your son. No comment, I said quickly. Mrs. Thornton, we have additional information about your corporate holdings. Are you aware that several other executives at your subsidiary companies have family members in management positions? Are you planning to address what appears to be a pattern of undisclosed nepotism? Hung up, my hands shaking. This was spiraling beyond Gerald's personal grievances into a full corporate investigation. At noon, Bernard called with the news I'd been dreading. Clarisse, Cora Financial Group, just submitted a formal acquisition proposal. They're offering to buy Meridian Holdings at a significant discount, citing governance issues and management uncertainty as justification for the reduced valuation. They orchestrated this entire situation, I said. The pieces finally clicking into place. Cora Martinez didn't just investigate Gerald. She deliberately triggered this crisis to create an acquisition opportunity. It gets worse. They've also offered Gerald a position as Chief Strategy Officer at their firm, contingent on his cooperation with providing inside information about Meridian's operations during the transition. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. Cora Financial had identified our family dynamic as a weakness, exploited it to create chaos, and was now positioning themselves to acquire the company at a reduced price while recruiting my own son to help them do it. Bernard, where does the board stand? Split. Half want you to reveal your identity and take direct control to stabilize the situation. The other half think your involvement will only make the governance questions worse. And Clarisse? They're questioning whether you've been honest with them about other potential conflicts of interest. That afternoon's board meeting was the most difficult professional experience of my life. Sitting in the conference room where I'd made countless strategic decisions from the shadows, I now found myself defending my own integrity to people I'd worked with for years. The allegations suggest a pattern of deception, board member Patricia Williams said bluntly. How can we trust that there aren't other undisclosed family connections or conflicts of interest? My son's employment was handled through normal channels, I replied. His performance reviews, his promotions, his client assignments, none of those were influenced by me directly. But they were influenced by the fact that you owned the company, countered board member James Morton. Gerald's success was built on a foundation he was unaware of. That raises questions about every personnel decision we've made. The meeting ended with a vote of no confidence in my leadership and a demand that I consider selling my stake in the company to restore market confidence. Driving home, I realized that Gerald's pain and anger had been weaponized by people who saw our family dysfunction as a business opportunity. My attempt to teach him respect had created a vulnerability that corporate predators were now exploiting. But the most devastating realization came when I arrived home to find Emma sitting on my front porch, her small suitcase beside her. Grandma, she said, her 8-year-old voice steady but sad. Mommy and Daddy are fighting about you. They sent me to stay here while they figure things out. As I hugged my granddaughter, I understood that the cost of this crisis extended far beyond corporate valuations or family pride. Emma was now caught in the middle of a conflict that threatened to tear apart the only family she'd ever known. The worthless old hag had created a mess that might be impossible to clean up. That evening, as Emma slept in the guest room, I sat in my home office staring at the documents that had started this whole mess. Gerald's childhood drawings of our family, his college acceptance letter, the photo from his first day at Pinnacle Marketing. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of what really mattered. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Thornton, this is Grace. I'm using a friend's phone. Can you meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at 8 a.m.? Come alone. There's something you need to know." The next morning, I found Grace sitting on the same bench where I used to take Gerald and Emma to feed ducks. She looked exhausted, but her expression was determined. "Grace, where's Gerald?" "He's meeting with Cora Financial this morning. They're finalizing his employment agreement." She paused, studying my face. "Clarisse, he's about to make the biggest mistake of his life, and I need your help to stop him." "What do you mean?" Grace pulled out her phone and showed me a recorded conversation. "I recorded Gerald's phone call with Cora Martinez last night. Listen to this." The recording was damning. Cora's voice was clear. "Gerald, we need you to understand that your mother's company is just the tip of the iceberg. We have evidence that Thornton Holdings has been engaged in aggressive acquisition practices that may violate antitrust regulations. Your insider knowledge could be valuable in building a case." Gerald's voice responded, "What kind of case?" "The kind that could result in criminal charges if the right prosecutors get involved. But if you cooperate with us, we can ensure you're protected as a whistleblower rather than treated as a potential conspirator." I felt sick. They're not just trying to acquire the company, they're trying to destroy it. "There's more," Grace said. After Gerald hung up, I confronted him. He admitted that he's been having doubts about working with them, but he feels trapped. He thinks if he doesn't cooperate, they'll destroy his reputation and possibly pursue legal action against him. "Grace, why are you telling me this?" "Because yesterday, Emma asked me why her daddy was so angry at you. I tried to explain about grown-up business problems, but she said something that made me realize what's really happening here." "What did she say?" "She said, 'Mommy, Daddy forgot that Grandma is the one who taught him to be brave.'" Grace's voice cracked slightly. "Clarisse, Gerald is scared. He's not angry at you for deceiving him. He's terrified that everything he's accomplished isn't real. And now he's about to destroy both of you because he can't see any other way out." I stared at the pond where Gerald had once caught his first fish, where Emma had taken her first steps, where 3 generations of our family had shared countless quiet moments. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to save your son," Grace said simply. "Because despite everything that's happened, despite all the hurt and anger, he's still the little boy who used to brag to his friends about how smart his mom was." "Grace, I don't know if I can fix this. The damage might be too extensive." "Then don't fix it," she said, standing up. "End it. On your terms. Show Gerald what a real businesswoman does when her family is threatened." As Grace walked away, I realized she was right. I'd been playing defense, trying to manage the crisis and minimize damage, but the situation called for something different. It was time for the worthless old hag to show everyone exactly what she was capable of. By 10 a.m., I was sitting across from Cora Martinez in her corporate office, watching her confident smile falter as I placed a thick manila folder on her desk. "Mrs. Thornton, I wasn't expecting to see you today. I thought you might be busy dealing with the situation at Meridian Holdings." "The situation you created," I said calmly. "But I'm not here to discuss that. I'm here to discuss Cora Financial's illegal corporate espionage activities. Her smile disappeared entirely. I'm not sure what you mean. I opened the folder and spread out documents across her desk. These are records of unauthorized access attempts on Meridian's servers. The IP addresses trace directly back to Cora Financial. This is evidence of your firm attempting to hack into our proprietary client databases. That's a serious accusation. This, I continued, placing another document on top, is a recording of your employee offering my son financial incentives to provide confidential information about Meridian's business operations. That's industrial espionage. Cora's face had gone pale. Where did you get these? I've been in business for over 20 years, Ms. Martinez. Did you really think I'd build a $400 million company without learning how to protect it? I leaned forward. You made one critical mistake. You assumed that because I kept a low profile, I was weak. You confused discretion with vulnerability. I placed a final document on her desk, a legal filing. This is a lawsuit I'm filing against Cora Financial for corporate espionage, attempted extortion, and interference with business relationships. The damages I'm seeking exceed your company's total valuation. You can't prove. I can prove all of it. And more importantly, I can prove that you deliberately manipulated a family crisis to create business opportunities. That level of calculated cruelty tends to resonate with juries. Cora stared at the documents, her corporate composure finally cracking. What do you want? I want you to call my son immediately and tell him that Cora Financial is withdrawing its job offer due to strategic restructuring. I want you to publicly retract any statements about Meridian Holdings' business practices. And I want you to stay away from my family. And if I don't, then I'll destroy your company and your reputation. I'll make sure that every business publication in the country knows that Cora Financial engaged in industrial espionage and attempted to blackmail a family using their personal relationships. She picked up her phone with shaking hands. I listened as she called Gerald, her voice professionally neutral as she delivered the message that Cora Financial was restructuring their executive hiring plans and would no longer be moving forward with his employment. After she hung up, I stood to leave. Ms. Martinez, you investigated my family to find weaknesses you could exploit. What you discovered instead is that underestimating a mother's love for her children is the most expensive mistake you can make. 20 minutes later, I was walking into the Meridian Holdings building, my building, for what would be the most important meeting of my business career. The board was waiting, along with Gerald, who had arrived directly from his canceled meeting with Cora Financial. As I entered the conference room, I saw confusion and uncertainty on every face. They'd all been operating under assumptions about power, control, and family dynamics that were about to be completely rewritten. "Good morning," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table, the seat I'd never occupied before. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about who really runs this company." 6 months later, I stood in the boardroom of the newly renamed Thornton Meridian Holdings, watching Gerald deliver his first quarterly presentation as Chief Operating Officer. The room was filled with the same board members who had once questioned my integrity, now listening intently as my son outlined his strategic vision for the company's future. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. After that confrontational board meeting, Gerald and I had spent weeks in family counseling, working through the layers of hurt, misunderstanding, and pride that had nearly destroyed our relationship. Emma had been our catalyst, her 8-year-old. Wisdom cutting through our adult complications with questions like, why can't Daddy be proud that Grandma is so smart at business? Gerald's journey back to the company had been entirely his choice. After the Cora Financial situation collapsed, he'd taken 3 months to evaluate his options, eventually deciding that working with family wasn't a weakness. It was a privilege, provided it was done with honesty and clear boundaries. Our Q3 numbers reflect not just financial growth, but cultural transformation, Gerald was saying. We've implemented new governance standards that ensure transparent communication and merit-based advancement while leveraging the stability and long-term vision that family ownership provides. Grace caught my eye from across the room and smiled. She'd become our family mediator and was now heading up our new corporate social responsibility division. Emma, sitting in the back row as our youngest board observer, was drawing pictures of the office building with a sign that read, "Grandma and Daddy's Company." After the meeting, Gerald and I walked to the executive floor cafe, a space I'd had renovated to encourage informal collaboration between different departments. "You know," Gerald said, stirring sugar into his coffee, "I owe you an apology." "Gerald, we've been through this. No, not for the anger or the accusations. I owe you an apology for calling you a worthless old hag." He met my eyes directly. "I realize now that I said that because I was threatened by how much you actually knew about business. I wanted to diminish you because your competence made me feel inadequate. And now I realize that having a mother who built a business, empire from nothing, isn't something to be embarrassed about. It's something to aspire to." We sat in comfortable silence, watching employees from different divisions collaborate on projects that crossed traditional departmental boundaries. "There's something I want to show you," I said, pulling out my phone. On the screen was a news article from Business Journal. Thornton Meridian Holdings named Best Family Business of the Year for Corporate Governance Excellence. Gerald read the headline and laughed. "From corporate scandal to business excellence. In 6 months, only you could pull off that kind of turnaround." As we prepared to leave, Gerald paused at the elevator. "Mom, Emma asked me yesterday what I learned from all this. You know what I told her?" "What?" "I told her that sometimes the people who love you most are also the ones who challenge you most, and that being part of a family business means you get to build something together that's bigger than what any of you could create alone." The elevator doors opened, and as we stepped inside, I realized that the most valuable lesson from this entire experience wasn't about business strategy or corporate governance. It was about the difference between demanding respect and earning it, and understanding that true family legacy isn't about hiding your strength, but about sharing it with the people you love most. The worthless old hag had indeed learned something valuable. Sometimes the best way to teach someone your worth is to show them what life looks like without it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.